What's interesting that we found through the years is that you definitely can look at the different association and diversity. That is, the number of different aquatic plants that you have in a lake system is very much related to its trophic status, or in other words, how clean it is. And we refer to these as limnologists as being either oligotrophic lakes or mesotrophic or eutrophic lakes, and that's a fancy term for saying basically in the case of oligos, it's nutrient poor, the water is very clear, there's good dissolved oxygen, usually associated with the cold water fisheries, and a good diversity, and lots of different variety of different kinds of aquatic plants, underwater aquatic plants. If you go to the other spectrum from mesotrophic to eutrophic, in eutrophic lakes you can have oxygen depletion at times, you can have more warm water associated fish, you can have a lot more algae that grows, you can have fish kills when a lot of the algae and aquatic plants that are in there die off and decompose, and they consume the oxygen in the water. So basically this lake is interesting. Hayden Lake is probably one of the most interesting lakes to study in that it really has many different personalities. It has parts of the lake that are oligotrophic, some that are mesotrophic, and some that are eutrophic. And so it's kind of schizophrenic that way. It has multiple personalities, and it has a different association of submerged or underwater plants in the lake as a result of that. So what we've devised is a way of classifying lakes in relation to the diversity of the submerged aquatic plants, and that's related to the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water, how clear the water is, the types of fish that you have in the water, the types of plants that you have in the water. This is the general overall water quality trophic condition of the lake. That you look at the diversity of underwater aquatic plants, and any time when a noxious species such as Eurasian water milfoil comes in and starts to become dominant in part of it, there's a need for management, either control or eradication of that milfoil, so it doesn't eliminate the more desirable underwater plants that we have in the lake. Well, I've been working with Eurasian water milfoil since 1966, if you can believe that. Worked at University of Wisconsin in Madison on a master's thesis on control of Eurasian water milfoil on Lake Mendota in Madison for my master's degree. It's one of the most extensive studied lakes in the world. And what we found for trying to control Eurasian water milfoil by harvesting, that we could actually change the composition of the submergent macrophytes, these underwater plants in the lake, based on the depth of which those milfoil was growing, and if you harvest it once or twice during the year. It's basically a maintenance program when you get into aquatic weave harvesting, but you have to actually remove the plant because Eurasian water milfoil has this bad habit of reproducing vegetatively or just from broken fragments or stems that are in the water. Which is true for a lot of noxious weed species, aquatic weed species. When we did a lake water quality assessment study back in the early 90s on this lake, it was in relatively good condition and there was very little milfoil. That was in 1992, and it is now 2007, so in about 15 years you've seen a tremendous invasion of Eurasian water milfoil in all parts of Hayden Lake here, both in the eutrophic bays and the mesotrophic bays. The oligotrophic areas where the water's clearer, deeper, colder, and the oxygen's better, there's more sand in the lake substrate or the lake bottom, they don't tend to be quite as prolific. So there is some correlation about how rapidly Eurasian water milfoil will grow in lakes based on water quality. We do rake tosses a lot of times, and with a rope and a rake toss that will throw in the lake and then bring up the vegetation and identify a particular point intercepts that are established on a grid system for the lake to determine what kind of plants are on the lake bottom. You can also do it with eco sounders producing ecographs, but you need to have scuba divers to verify the compositional makeup of the submerged aquatic community that's down there as it would show up from the eco sounders. So diving is probably the best way to get the most accurate information. It is a little more costly, it's more time consuming. The identification of some of these submergent aquatic plants can get pretty tricky, especially the narrow-leaf potamogetans. Some people say potamogetans. At any rate, they're the pondweed group of underwater plants that make up, usually at least 50% of the submergent aquatic plants that you find in most of our lakes. So it's a challenge to work with the taxonomy of these plants in relation to the noxious weed species such as milfoil. Eurasian water milfoil also is a species that tends to hybridize, and so a lot of times hybrids of milfoil are difficult to identify just by morphology or regular plant taxonomic identification. In those cases, the most sure way to separate out what particular hybrid or species of milfoil that you're working with is through DNA analysis, and of course that gets very costly and time consuming too, but it is a good way to better delineate what particular hybrid or a variation of variety or ecospecies that you're working with when you're looking at milfoil. So good solid monitoring information, background data, as well as data post as well as pre-treatment is essential if you're going to have a good sound ecological management program for controlling Eurasian water milfoil.